What's going on, kids? Today we're going to take a look at measuring brake rotor thickness, runout, and parallelism on a 2016 GMC Canyon. But before we start pulling this truck apart, we need to find out exactly what we're looking for. So I'm already up on Identifix, and we want to search for our 2016 GMC Canyon. This one happens to be an SLT. So I'm doing the pull-down vehicle selection this time. Doesn't matter which one you do. I could just go and type in 2016 GMC Canyon over here in the VIN search. This is the gas truck, so 3.6. And once this loads, we're going to go back to that same quick hits area. And instead of going to fluids and capacities or torque specs like we're used to doing, there's a spot that is dedicated just to brake specs. And right at the top, we have our brake rotor measurements. There's positions for front and rear because we have different specs for the front rotors versus the rear. This is a four-wheel disc brake truck. Our parallelism variation is 0.0002 of an inch. So take an inch, chop that up into 1,000 pieces. Take one of those pieces, chop that up into 10 pieces, and 2 of those. That's all of the space we have for a parallelism variation. So that means our rotors aren't parallel, the inside and the outside of it. Max runout is 0.02 of an inch. Nominal thickness is the thickness of the rotor when it was brand new. So our front rotors were 1.07 inches thick when they were brand new. And then the discard thickness is how thin it can get after we're done cutting it. So if we did have a parallelism or runout issue and we had to put the rotor on our brake lathe and shave down that inside and outside edge, we could shave it all the way down to 0.98. So now that we know what we're looking for, let's pull this truck apart. So here on the toolbox, we've got the 3 tools that we're going to be using to measure our brake rotors. The one that I use probably the most often is a dial caliper. I prefer the dial calipers to the digital calipers that you can get for $3 just about everywhere that cheap tools are sold, because the batteries don't die on this one. The batteries always seem to fall out and die when you need to measure something. So with this dial caliper, as I draw the actual measurement jaws out, you'll see the dial swing around. And I've got 2 different needles on this dial. The orange one is on the inside for our metric measurements, and the full units are on the top of this bar, whereas our inch measurements are down here on the bottom. If I bring this out to 1, the large 1 on the bottom scale, and I center the black needle on 0, you can tighten up the jaws on here. This is exactly 1.000 inches between here and here. So this is going to measure down to the 1,000th of an inch. If I open this up a little bit more, I can bring this to, let's go there. And so this measurement, I'm past the large 1, so that's 1.1, 1.2, and then we're going to go to our dial for our hundredths and our thousandths. So this measurement is 1.231. So this measurement tool is a micrometer. We're going to use this to get in there and measure our parallelism so we can slide the rotor kind of into this area right here and actually get down and measure 5 or 6 different points on the rotor. But to read the gauge on here, it's different than a dial caliper, because as you spin this up, this is the thimble, as you spin this out, you can see the numbers on here go all the way up to 50 and then reset. So on our gauge along here, we've got our full inch. So these are our inch units and our tenths. And then this gap here is exactly 1 inch. And as I spin this out, we're going up by the 1,000th on this. So when I spin this back to 0, I get to another line, and that's 1.050. If I go around again, I'm at 1.1. Go around again, 1.15, go around again, and now I'm exposing that 1.2 mark. So if you get past one of the half marks, you just have to add your 0.05 to your 100th and 1000th that you see on the needle. I'll explain that when we go in there and actually measure this on a rotor. And this last tool is our dial indicator. The dial indicator is what's going to measure our runout down to the 1/2 of 1,000th of 1 inch. So each tick mark on here is 0.0005. So if I can move the outer edge to zero out our needle, depending on where we have this placed on the car. And as I push in on this, you'll see it flies. It moves crazy fast. That's because each tick mark on here, again, is 1/2 of 1,000th of 1 inch. We're going to go a little bit more in depth in this when it's actually on the car. So I print out my spec sheet so I know what we're looking for, and I'm just going to grab a magnet tray and slap this to the side of the lift so I can always go back and look at it. First measurement we're going to do is an overall rotor thickness. I'm going to use the dial caliper. And you're not always going to be able to use a dial caliper if there's a rust lip on the edge of the rotor. If you see rust build up and the outer edge of the rotor is thicker than the rest of it, this isn't going to work, and you have to use a micrometer so you can go around and measure kind of further deep in on the rotor. But this brake's going to be okay. The other thing we kind of lucked out, there's a little gap right here where I don't have to remove this gigantic caliper in order to get into the rotor surface. There's a little break in the dust shield back here, so we don't actually have to pull this one apart to get our measurements. So I'm going to use my dial caliper and put this over the outside edge and then tighten down the set screw. And I'm going to take a look at our measurements here. So the overall thickness of this rotor is going to be 1.66. So we're past the 1, the big 1. We're not quite to the second 1 in a row here, so that would be 1.1. We're not quite there yet, so we come back to our needle for our hundredths and our thousandths, and that's going to be 1.066-ish. But measuring just the outside edge isn't enough. We need to start measuring in a couple of different places on the rotor. On the inside surface of the rotor, kind of down a little bit lower, be up a little bit higher, and then spin the rotor a couple of times to measure in some different areas to actually get our parallelism. So really all we're looking for is, one, to make sure that all these numbers are the same. Because remember, this doesn't go down to the 10,000th of an inch, the 0.0001. This one only goes down to the 1,000th of an inch. So we can't really do a parallelism measurement, but we can at least kind of get an idea, is it the same thickness all the way around? Does the rotor kind of do this on its way up? So we'll measure in the outermost edge. And you notice as I spin this in, I'm spinning by this gnarled thimble side. And when I spin that, as soon as this gets tight, this part stops turning. So as I spin the thimble in and it gets tight, when I spin this and the black part here stops going, that means we have our measurement. I'm going to measure this in a couple of different places. Spin the rotor, measure it again. This one tells me I am at 1.038. 1.038. 1.038. 1.038. 1.041. So we do have a little bit of a parallelism issue. We are over spec, but this car does not give me a vibration issue. I don't have a pulsing in the pedal or anything like that. So all we would need to do is cut this rotor if the customer had a complaint. Next thing we do is measure our rotor runout. So for measuring rotor runout, we're going to use our dial indicator. The dial indicator has a I guess Vice Grip is a brand, a pair of locking pliers that we will clamp onto something that's not going to move. So this is a fixed caliper, and there's a little ear here that I can grab onto, and that's not going to move on us. And normally I would have to use the lug nuts or maybe some washers to bolt the rotor down if it was about to come off. But this one has a Torx screw that holds the rotor onto the hub, so I don't have to worry about it moving around back and forth. So once I have the rotor secured and I've got this pair of locking pliers on here, this is kind of like one of those wooden snake things you used to get from the fair if you ever went to like the Wisconsin State Fair as a kid. You can manipulate this around, and this end is what holds the actual dial indicator. We'll screw this in. You don't have to jam it on here. You can just kind of snug it up. And then as I spin this red knob on the bottom, there's a cam inside of there that will lock this into whatever position we've moved it in. So now that's locked. Grab the dial indicator. Put it in the clamp. And you want to make sure you don't shove this thing all the way down in to the clamp, because this outer red ring still needs to move, and if you shove it all the way down there, it gets bound up. So I'll loosen the cam and then position this kind of anywhere you want to measure, and then tighten down the cam. Make sure you're not touching the actual rotor though. And we'll tighten up the cam. So that's going to hold all of this in place while we get our measurement. We want to take a look at our needle, and I'm going to spin this rotor by hand until it goes as far negative as I can get it to go. Seems like it's pretty stable. Oh, that was a lie. So we're coming down. And then it starts to come back up, so I want to stop. This is going to be my 0, and I can move this outer ring to set my 0 where the needle is. And remember, each tick mark on here is 1/2 of 1,000th of 1 inch. So I know this is upside down for you. Maybe I'll flip it over in post. But as I spin this, you're going to see that needle start to walk up. And that's measuring our runout. So remember, our maximum rotor runout for this vehicle was 0.002. So that would be 4 tick marks. And we've actually moved closer to 8.5 tick marks as I was moving this thing up. So the rotor runout for this vehicle is 0.0045, or thereabouts, 0.0045. That is above what GM wants it to be, but most vehicle manufacturers say about 0.005 is acceptable runout. Again, I don't notice any pulsing on the brake pedal. To the letter, these rotors are out of spec for both parallelism and for runout issues, but it's not really giving me a problem. So if I cut it, would it drive better? Yeah, probably, but with all of the things that are between this rotor and my pedal, I really don't feel anything. So drivability-wise, the brake rotors on this truck are actually pretty okay. I don't notice any pulsing in the pedal. There's no shaking in the steering wheel when I'm under braking. But if I actually pull them apart and measure down to the 10,000th of an inch, they are out of tolerance, right? They're not right at spec. We've got that tolerance, the little bit of wiggle room there, and we are just barely outside of that. So should these rotors be cut? Yes. Would these rotors probably come in due to a vibrating or pedal issue? They might, and then you should cut them and then do a road test again. But I'm just going to put them back the way they are because they aren't really giving me any issues. But if you have any questions, please feel free to shoot me an email. But until next time, be good.